My daughter refused to come to the hospital when I was on the verge of death. I was lying there, helpless, doctors and nurses moving quickly around me, their voices urgent. They called her again and again, begging her to hurry, telling her she needed to come now because I might not have another chance. But her answer cut through me, deeper than any pain in my chest. "I'm busy," she said coldly, as if my life meant nothing. She was at home celebrating her husband's birthday, raising a glass of champagne, laughing, while her own father was fighting for his last breath. That moment carved a wound in me that no medicine could ever heal. I realized then how fragile love within a family could be, how easily it could be dismissed, traded away for something as trivial as a party. 2 weeks passed. My body grew weaker, but my mind became sharper, colder. I had been given a second chance at life, but it came with clarity, with truth that burned. I called the bank. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled. I did what I had to do, what any father in my position would do. It was not revenge, but choice, a choice born out of betrayal, disappointment, and the need to protect what little dignity I had left. Later that evening, I heard the front door slam open. My daughter stormed inside, her eyes wide with panic. Her voice shook as she shouted my name, but she was too late. I had already made my decision. My course was set, irreversible. The steady beeping of the hospital machines pulled me back from somewhere dark and distant. My eyelids felt as heavy as stones, refusing to open. When I finally forced them apart, the world stabbed at me with fluorescent lights, sharp and merciless, drilling into my skull like hot needles. "Mr. Dunn, can you hear me?" A woman's voice, professional, yet filled with warmth. I tried to answer, but my throat was raw, like I'd swallowed sandpaper. My chest ached with every shallow breath. The room swam around me, white walls, machines, blinking tubes, coiling like snakes around my arms. "What happened to me?" I croaked. The nurse leaned closer. Her badge read Janet. Her eyes, kind behind wire-rimmed glasses, softened as she spoke. "You had a heart attack, Mr. Dunn. You're in the intensive care unit at Northwestern Memorial. It's Tuesday afternoon, April 15th. Tuesday. My mind stumbled. I remembered leaving for the grocery store Monday morning. Everything after that, nothing but darkness. How long have I been here? Since yesterday evening. The paramedics brought you in around 7 p.m. You scared us for a while there." Her words hung heavy, but before I could ask more, a doctor appeared. He was young with tired eyes and a stethoscope slung around his neck like a soldier's weapon. He pressed the cold metal to my chest, listening, frowning. "Mr. Dunn, I'm Dr. Martinez. Your heart suffered significant damage, but you're stable now. We need to monitor you very closely in the coming days." "Will I be okay?" My voice sounded weak even to me. He gave a measured answer. "With proper treatment and lifestyle changes, many patients recover. But we'll need to discuss medication, diet, and follow-up care." I nodded faintly. My mind, trained as an engineer, automatically broke his words into technical data points. Heart attack, significant damage, monitor closely. It felt unreal, as if he were talking about someone else's body, someone else's life. Janet adjusted the IV drip. "Your blood pressure is improving. Are you feeling chest pain now?" "Some," I admitted, shifting slightly before pain tore through my ribs like fire. "That's normal after what you've endured," Dr. Martinez said calmly. "We'll keep your pain under control, but if it worsens, call us immediately." The rest of the day blurred into a haze of medical procedures, blood tests, EKGs, medication changes, steady footsteps of nurses entering and leaving. They moved with practiced precision, always checking, always monitoring, always explaining. By evening, they deemed me stable enough to leave the ICU. Janet herself oversaw the transfer, wheeling my bed down long, sterile corridors lined with identical doors. "Room 347, she announced as we entered a quieter, warmer space. "This will be more comfortable." The room had a window that opened westward. As night fell, Chicago lit up in 1,000 twinkling lights. From up here, the city looked small, like the blueprints I once studied, everything neatly aligned, patterns precise, and logical, life reduced to symmetry. Janet smiled softly. "Dr. Ellis, your cardiologist, will see you soon. He's a good man. You'll like him." I stared out at the city. Somewhere below, life went on, People celebrated, laughed, argued, lived. But for me, everything had changed. My heart was still beating. Yes, but the one thing I had thought unshakable, the love of my own daughter, had failed me when I needed it most. And that truth was heavier than any illness I could endure. I sank deeper into the hospital pillows, my body betraying me in ways I had never known. Exhaustion pressed against my limbs like iron weights, reminding me of the cruel truth. I was no longer the man I once was. At 68, I had always taken pride in my independence, fixing things around the house, carrying groceries up the stairs, walking briskly to clear my mind after a long day. Now I couldn't even sit up without help. My hands, once steady enough to sketch out blueprints with precision, trembled when I reached for the cup of water beside my bed. Outside my window, the city was sliding into evening. The fading daylight painted the glass in shades of gold before surrendering to gray. I imagined the rhythm of ordinary life unfolding below, people rushing home from work kitchens, filling with the aroma of dinner laughter, spilling from playgrounds where children chased each other with boundless energy. That world moved forward without pause while I lay tethered to machines that monitored every faltering beat of my damaged heart. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. The door opened and in stepped a man whose very presence seemed to carry authority. Dr. Ellis. Tall, dignified, with silver streaks in his hair and wire-rimmed glasses that framed a face marked by years of delivering hard truths. His movements were calm, deliberate, the kind of steadiness one only acquires after decades of standing between life and death. "Benjamin, I'm Dr. Grover Ellis," he said, pulling a chair close to my bed and settling down with a thick medical chart. His voice was low, steady, yet compassionate. "How are you feeling this evening?" I tried to find humor in the moment, like I'd been hit by a truck, I admitted with a weak smile. "But better than this morning, I suppose." He allowed himself a small smile before his expression grew serious. He opened the chart, pulling out an EKG printout, the jagged lines sprawling across the page like some erratic, abstract artwork. He turned it toward me. "I need to be frank with you about your condition. The heart attack you suffered was severe ischemia. It struck the main artery that supplies blood to your heart muscle." My engineering background kicked in, allowing me to process the mechanics of what he was saying. He tapped a section of the paper. "Here, the left anterior descending artery. We managed to open it with emergency medication, but..." He paused, his tone heavier. "You've lost about 20% of your heart muscle." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What does that mean for my future?" "With proper treatment, many patients live long, fulfilling lives," he said carefully. "But I won't mislead you. For several hours it was touch and go. You nearly didn't make it." Silence pressed in around us. The steady beeping of the monitor filled the void. Then Dr. Ellis leaned forward, his gaze steady but softened by concern. "Benjamin, I need to ask you something. Do you have family we should contact an emergency contact?" A sudden ache, not physical, but deeper, tightened in my chest. My voice wavered. "My daughter. Agnes. She lives in Lincoln Park with her husband." Dr. Ellis adjusted his glasses, consulting his notes. "I actually tried calling her yesterday. The situation was critical and, well, we thought you might not make it through the night." The air in the room seemed to thin. My stomach clenched. "You spoke with her?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough to send dread coursing through me. He had seen it all: joy, grief, panic, denial, but rarely did doctors struggle to recount what they had heard. "Yes," he said, at last, his voice heavy. "Benjamin, I've practiced cardiology for 25 years. I've made thousands of calls like that. When I tell someone their father may not survive the night, they usually drop everything. They come running. They beg me for updates. They weep." My own voice came out as a whisper. "And Agnes? What did she say?" Dr. Ellis looked down at his hands, then back at me, with something like sorrow in his eyes. "She said she was busy, that it was her husband's birthday. She couldn't leave the party." The words struck me harder than the heart attack itself. My pulse spiked. The monitor beeped erratically. I clutched the sheets as if they could anchor me against the tide of betrayal crashing over me. "Even when you told her..." My voice broke. "Even when you told her it might be my last night alive?" His eyes were full of regret. "Yes. I explained everything, the severity of your condition, that you were asking for her. She said, she'd try to visit sometime this week if her schedule permitted. I turned my face to the ceiling, the sterile white panels blurring through tears I didn't want to shed. My daughter, the child I had raised, nurtured, sacrificed for, chose a party over me. I had been there for every milestone of her life, every storm she couldn't weather alone. Yet when I needed her, truly needed her, she couldn't even cross the city. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, Doctor, Ellis said quietly. I debated whether or not to share it, but I believe patients have the right to know how their families respond in these moments. I closed my eyes, forcing back the raw ache in my chest. No, I said finally, my voice ragged. You were right to tell me, because truth, no matter how cruel, was better than lies wrapped in comfort. My voice sounded hollow, as though it didn't belong to me anymore. I had needed to ask the question, but the answer had cut me in a way no scalpel could. Dr. Ellis remained a few more minutes, outlining medication schedules, describing dietary restrictions, painting a picture of the long road of recovery ahead. I tried to focus, but his words blurred together, drifting past me like static. My mind kept circling back, again and again, to the words that would not leave me. She was busy. Her husband's birthday. She couldn't leave the party. Each phrase echoed in my head like a cruel refrain, stabbing deeper every time I replayed it. I'll check on you tomorrow morning, Dr. Ellis said, finally rising to his feet. His hand briefly touched the foot of my bed in a gesture of reassurance. Try to get some rest, Mr. Dunn. Your body needs time to heal. And then he was gone. The door closed with a soft click, and the room fell into a silence that was almost unbearable. Only the steady mechanical rhythm of the heart monitor reminded me I was still alive. I turned my head toward the window. Beyond the glass, Chicago glimmered, its countless lights stretching into the horizon. Each little pinprick of light was a life, a father returning home, a mother tucking in her children, a family gathering around a dinner table. Every light carried meaning, connection, love. Agnes had made her priorities clear. The thought settled in me like a stone at the bottom of a well, heavy and cold. I shifted on the bed, but no position eased the ache in my chest. The pain wasn't from the heart attack anymore. It was from betrayal. She was busy. It was her husband's birthday. I whispered the words to myself, as though repeating them enough times might make them easier to believe. But they didn't soften. They only hardened into truth. My eyes traced the lights of the city again. Each one seemed to mock me. Somewhere out there, daughters were rushing to their fathers' hospital beds, holding their hands, whispering encouragement. Somewhere, families were dropping everything because love demanded it. But not mine. Not my daughter. For a fleeting moment, I clung to the possibility that Dr. Ellis had misunderstood, that maybe Agnes hadn't realized how grave things were. She could be forgetful, scattered, living in her own orbit. Surely when faced with her father's mortality, she would have come. Wouldn't she? But no. Deep down, I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was Agnes being Agnes. It wasn't the first time she had chosen her own convenience over my needs. It was simply the most brutal. My mind drifted back through the years, unspooling memories I had buried beneath layers of quiet sacrifice. I saw her at 20, standing in my kitchen with bright eyes clutching acceptance letters. "Dad, I got into Northwestern." "Can you believe it?" she'd said, spreading the papers across the table like a winning hand of cards. Of course I could believe it. I had helped her every step of the way, reviewing essays, correcting drafts, encouraging her through late-night study sessions. What I couldn't believe was the tuition bill, $40,000. My salary as an engineer was respectable, but not enough to shoulder such a weight without consequence. It meant extra hours, years of overtime, canceled vacations, and a retirement that slipped further out of reach. Yet when I looked at her face, so alive, so full of ambition, I knew there was no question. I would find a way. And I did. 60-hour weeks for 4 years. Weekends sacrificed to consulting projects. Holidays blurred into deadlines. My back ached, my eyes burned from endless hours over blueprints, but coffee and determination kept me moving. And in the end, when Agnes walked across the stage and graduated magna cum laude, I thought every sacrifice had been worth it. Then came the wedding. Martin Harper, smooth words, charming smile, promises too big to be true. I distrusted him from the beginning, but Agnes looked at him with the blind certainty of love. "Dad, you only get married once." I want it to be perfect. Perfect. $15,000 for perfection. The venue, the flowers, the photos, every detail, a price tag. I drained my savings, borrowed against my pension, worked until my hands trembled just to give her that day. And what did it buy a marriage that lasted 2 years before it fractured? Then a reconciliation, then another failure. A cycle that drained her spirit and my wallet every time. The numbers piled up in my head as precise as any calculation I'd made in my engineering days. Down payment on their house, $12,000. Loan for Martin's ill-fated restaurant, $8,000. Emergency cash when Agnes lost her job, $3,000. Car repair on their BMW, $1,500. On and on until the total eclipsed $100,000. And that didn't even count the countless little things, the weekends I spent helping them move the birthday gifts that stretched my budget, the Christmas presents I forced myself to afford even when I shouldn't have. And last night, while I lay dying in a hospital bed, Agnes couldn't even leave a party. I rolled onto my side, ignoring the tug of IV tubes, and let my gaze sweep across the Chicago skyline. The city glowed alive and indifferent, every twinkling light a reminder of all the families who chose each other. Except mine. Somewhere out there in their Lincoln Park condo, the very condo I had helped them afford with years of sacrifice, Agnes and Martin were probably clinking glasses of expensive wine, surrounded by friends celebrating another year of Martin's worthless life. I could picture it, Martin holding court, boasting about his latest half-baked business idea. Agnes laughing just a little too loudly, the sparkle of jewelry she hadn't paid for catching the light. And me, I lay here, tubes tethered to my body, my pulse monitored by machines, my existence reduced to graphs on a screen. She said she'd try to visit sometime this week, if her schedule permitted. Her schedule? As if my near death had been nothing more than a routine appointment, a dentist checkup she could reschedule if she felt like it. The anger didn't hit me all at once. It started small, a warm knot low in my stomach, growing hotter with every breath rising up through my chest, until my whole body burned, with something far more powerful than cardiac pain. For 68 years, I had been the responsible one, the steady one, the man who carried burdens so that others didn't have to, the man who quietly gave until giving became second nature, until sacrifice was the only language I knew. And what had all that earned me? A daughter who valued party decorations over her father's life, a son-in-law who lived like a king without ever earning a crown, a sterile hospital room where my only companion was the hollow echo of regret. I had given Agnes everything, my time, my money, my health, my very future. And now, lying here betrayed and humiliated, I realized something I should have seen years ago. Unconditional love becomes a trap when it is never reciprocated. No more. My heart monitor beeped in the darkness, each steady pulse reminding me of the truth I was still alive. And as long as I was alive, I still had choices. I still had power. I still had control over my legacy. Agnes thought she could dismiss me, take me for granted, treat me like an old man, too weak to matter. But she was about to discover how wrong she was. Morning crept into the room, a pale wash of light through the blinds. Nurse Janet bustled in with her usual quiet efficiency, lining up the rainbow of pills on the tray beside me. I swallowed them dutifully, the bitter taste coating my tongue, a reminder that healing was a slow, grinding process. "Time for your walk," Mr. Dunn said, Rita, the physical therapist, breezing in with a smile that grated against the storm brewing inside me. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to stay in bed, curl into the bitterness that was consuming me. But instead, I swung my legs over the side and complied. Step by step, we shuffled down the corridor. My legs were unsteady, my breath shallow, but I was stronger than yesterday. The cardiac wing buzzed with muted conversations, the ever-present symphony of beeping monitors, the faint scent of antiseptic and wilted flowers. When we passed room 352, I paused. An elderly man sat by the window staring at a vase of drooping flowers that had long lost their color. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes dull with a sadness I recognized too well. "Good morning," I said softly, resting against the doorframe for balance. He looked up startled, his gaze softened with recognition. "Morning. You're the engineer from 347, right? I'm Harold." "Benjamin," I answered. My chest ached, but it wasn't just from the effort of walking. "You seem troubled." Harold let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. Troubled my son cleaned out my savings while I was lying in this bed. $35,000 gone. Said he needed it for his business. He gestured at the withered flowers. These came with a card that said he was sorry. No visit, no phone call. Just sorry. The words struck me like a hammer blow. Another father, another betrayal, another story of love twisted into exploitation. Family, Harold muttered bitterly. They think we'll always forgive them because we're their parents. Because we always have. I carried those words with me as Rita guided me back to my room. They echoed louder than the beeping machines, louder than the shuffling of nurses' shoes in the hallway. By the time I sank back onto my bed, I was trembling not from weakness, but from conviction. That afternoon, I made my first phone call. Chase Bank Customer Service. This is Michelle. How may I help you? This is Benjamin Dunn, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. I need information about revoking power of attorney on my accounts. Of course, Mr. Dunn. I'll need to verify your identity first. I answered her questions automatically, my mind already racing ahead. To revoke power of attorney, she continued, you'll need to appear in person with proper documentation and file formal revocation papers. What documentation exactly? Photo ID, the original power of attorney document, and signed revocation forms. Once submitted, the process takes about 24 hours to complete. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. My pulse thrummed steadily in my ears. Agnes had power of attorney. I'd granted it to her 2 years ago, back when pneumonia left me too weak to manage my bills. At the time, it had seemed practical, sensible, even wise. Now it felt like the single most dangerous mistake of my life. Now it felt as though I had handed her not just a legal document, but a loaded weapon pointed directly at my chest. That realization gnawed at me, turning every quiet hour in the hospital into a rehearsal of regrets. The following week dragged forward with methodical precision, each day measured not only by the slow rhythm of my recovery, but also by the gathering storm of decisions I knew I had to make. Physically, there were small victories. I learned to walk further each day without clinging to Rita's arm. Solid food returned to my plate, bland oatmeal at first, then chicken broth, eventually something resembling real meals. Pain medication tapered off the fog in my mind, lifting as clarity seeped in. But beyond the surface progress, something deeper was happening. With every passing day, I gathered fragments of information, piecing together the path forward. On Wednesday, I called Thompson and Associates, the notary office downtown. My voice was steadier than I expected. Regarding will modifications, I asked. The receptionist, polite but brisk, explained the requirements in practice tones. Illinois law requires the testator to appear in person with 2 witnesses present. She recommended an additional safeguard mental competency verification. What kind of verification? I pressed. Usually a letter from your attending physician confirming you're mentally competent to make legal decisions. That was perfect. Dr. Ellis knew me well, and he would provide it without hesitation. I ended the call with a strange mixture of dread and relief, as though the walls of the hospital were beginning to crumble, revealing a road I finally had the courage to walk. By Friday, my discharge plan was taking shape. My strength was returning, but Agnes's absence remained a weight on my chest, heavier than any medical condition. She had called once during the week, a brief, perfunctory conversation. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked, her voice flat, distant. "I'm doing much better," I said, testing the waters, hoping for some warmth. "That's great. Martin and I have been so busy with his new consulting venture. We'll try to visit once you're home and settled." Try to visit. The words replayed in my head like a cruel refrain, as if seeing her recovering father, who had nearly died, was just another chore squeezed between social events and business ventures. Thursday evening, I found myself sitting in the hospital's small garden beside Eleanor from room 341. Her steps were slower than mine, her face pale under the dim lights. She was recovering from gallbladder surgery, but her true pain came not from the incision in her body, but the wound her daughter had left in her heart. 30 years I raised that girl, Eleanor, whispered her voice, heavy with a sorrow I recognized. Paid for her college, helped with her wedding, babysat her kids every weekend. When I needed surgery, she said she couldn't take time off work, said her job was too important. I listened silently, her words echoing my own reality. We were a generation of parents who had poured every ounce of our strength into building the future of our children, only to discover that when the time came, they had learned how to take, but never how to give back. "What will you do?" I asked softly. Eleanor's eyes, tired but resolute, hardened. "Change my will. Every penny goes to the animal shelter now. At least dogs are loyal." Her words clung to me long after we parted, seeping into my bones like cold air. Friday morning brought my final consultation with Dr. Ellis. His presence filled the room with quiet authority. He reviewed my charts, adjusted my medication schedule, and pronounced me ready for discharge. As he closed the folder, he lingered at the door. "Benjamin," he said carefully, "I hope you'll consider forgiveness. Holding on to anger isn't good for your heart." For a moment, I considered the advice. Then, to my surprise, I smiled, genuine calm, unforced. "Doctor," I said, "anger isn't what I'm holding on to. It's clarity." That evening, as the city lights of Chicago flickered beyond the hospital window, I let the weight of his words settle. Out there in their Lincoln Park condo, Agnes and Martin lived comfortably, cushioned by decades of my sacrifice, utterly indifferent to my brush with death. But tomorrow I would go home, and tomorrow I would begin to take back control of everything they had assumed was theirs to exploit. The power of attorney would be revoked. The will would be rewritten. And Agnes, my daughter, my betrayer, would finally learn that taking a father for granted came with consequences she could never have foreseen. This wasn't revenge. Revenge was reckless, driven by fury. No, I sought something cleaner, sharper, and more precise. I sought justice. And as an engineer, I knew the precision required to execute a design. Even this one. The discharge process began promptly at 8:00 a.m. Dr. Martinez entered with a folder thick with paperwork, medication schedules, dietary restrictions, appointment cards. Each page was another reminder that I had survived, that I still had choices to make, that my story was far from over. My signature trembled across the discharge forms, each letter uneven, fragile, but my resolve was firm, carved in stone. The paper may have betrayed the weakness of my body, but my spirit remained unshaken. "Remember, no heavy lifting for 6 weeks," Dr. Martinez reminded me, his pen scratching against the clipboard. "And if you experience any chest pain or shortness of breath, call immediately." I nodded politely, though my mind had already left the sterile walls of the hospital. My body might still have been bound by medical restrictions, but my thoughts were racing ahead toward choices, documents, and truths that would reshape the legacy of my life. As I gathered the meager belongings from my bedside table, a worn paperback, my glasses, and the faded photograph of Margaret that never left my side, Dr. Ellis entered. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders heavy, his eyes carrying the quiet exhaustion of a man who'd witnessed too many endings, delivered too many devastating truths. "Benjamin," he said softly, lowering himself to sit on the edge of my bed, "I wanted to see you off personally." I froze for a moment, struck by the rare kindness in his tone. "You've been through a tremendous ordeal physically, yes, but perhaps more painfully, emotionally," he continued. "Take time to heal. Don't rush yourself into decisions that can't be undone." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt the lump rise in my throat. "Doctor," I said, my voice unsteady but honest, "you've been more of a family to me these past 2 weeks than my own blood. That means more than I can say. And thank you for your honesty about Agnes." It cut deep, but it was the kind of pain I needed. Dr. Ellis studied me as though weighing the words I had not yet spoken. "Forgiveness," he said finally, "can be as healing as any medicine. Sometimes people don't see the damage they cause until the consequences arrive to teach them." I finished the sentence in my own way, sharper than he had intended. "You're right, doctor. Consequences teach better than words ever will." He pressed his lips together, not agreeing, not disagreeing, simply understanding, and left me with silence thick enough to drown in. Minutes later, after the last forms were signed, the discharge nurse arrived, young, cheerful, with eyes too kind for this world. She insisted on wheeling me to the entrance despite my protests. "Hospital policy," she said with a practiced smile. "Liability issues." The wheelchair rolled forward, carrying me toward the glass doors. And then with a soft hiss, they opened, releasing me back into the world. The April air struck me like revelation, cold, sharp, alive. 2 weeks of recycled hospital oxygen had dulled my senses, but now the wind against my skin felt like freedom, like rebirth. Chicago stretched out before me, restless, crowded, pulsing with strangers who carried their own burdens, their own families, families who perhaps loved them or perhaps betrayed them. I reached into my pocket for my phone, my hand trembling. Whether it was weakness from recovery or the anticipation of what lay ahead, I couldn't tell. The familiar monotone voice answered. Chase Bank Customer Service. This is Michelle. How may I assist you? This is Benjamin Dunn, I said, my words clipped, deliberate. Account number 4478921. I need to revoke power of attorney on all my accounts. Immediately, her voice was polite, practiced, as if she had handled this request 100 times before. Yes, Mr. Dunn, I can provide you with the information. However, revocation requires your presence at a branch office. You'll need photo identification, the original power of attorney documents, and you'll be asked to sign revocation forms in the presence of a bank officer. What branch, I asked. Our main downtown branch at 125 South LaSalle can process revocations. We're open until 4 p.m. Perfect. Just enough time. Time to go home, collect the papers, and begin peeling back every thread of control Agnes believed she had over me. I opened the rideshare app, the unfamiliar interface glowing coldly on my screen. Technology had never been my strong suit. I'd always preferred the simple reliability of calling a cab. But now even this small act felt like a declaration of independence. Victor. That was the name. The app said he'd arrive in 8 minutes. 8 minutes to stand on this sidewalk, breathing in the city air, feeling the weight of my choice settling onto my shoulders like a heavy but welcome coat. 8 minutes to let clarity sink into my bones. I wasn't just going home. I was reclaiming my life. A businessman rushed past, his voice sharp and impatient, as he barked into his phone about quarterly reports about profits and losses, about missing his daughter's recital because work had claimed yet another piece of his soul. Just behind him, a young mother maneuvered a stroller, one-handed, her other hand, clutching a phone pressed to her ear as she tried to negotiate daycare schedules, balancing 2 lives at once with the desperate efficiency only mothers know. All around me, people hurried their lives, bursting with responsibility, with duty, with others, depending on them. They belonged somewhere. They were needed. They were woven into the fabric of someone's world. Everyone, it seemed, except me. But that was about to change. For 68 years, I had been the dependable one, the provider, the builder, the safety net stretched beneath everyone else's dreams, catching their falls, softening their failures. I had worked overtime shifts so Agnes could get the education she wanted. I had emptied decades of savings to pay for her wedding, smiling even when my account balance was left gasping. I had sacrificed the fragile security of my retirement to prop up her husband's doomed business ventures, pouring my stability into their reckless ambitions. And when I lay dying, when my heart faltered, when mortality pressed down on me like a weight too heavy to resist, she had stayed at a party. She could not even bring herself to leave the music, the laughter, the meaningless chatter, to sit at her father's bedside. My phone buzzed in my hand, pulling me back to the present. Your driver, Victor, is arriving in a white Honda Accord. I looked up just in time to see the car pulling to the curb. A middle-aged man stepped out, his temples touched with gray, his movements careful but sure. He spotted me and without hesitation reached for my small hospital bag. Time to go home. Time to gather the papers, the power of attorney documents that had once seemed like a gesture of trust but now felt like chains around my wrists. Time to walk into Chase Bank and begin the process of taking back what was mine, my money, my choices, my life. Agnes thought she could dismiss me, sideline, me, reduce me to an obligation she could ignore. She thought my love and sacrifice had made me soft, pliable, safe. But she was about to learn that underestimating me, taking her father for granted, came with a price she had never considered. Victor Ramirez stepped around the Honda with the ease of a man who had spent decades helping strangers in and out of his car. His weathered face softened when he saw me emerge slowly from the hospital entrance, his eyes flicking briefly over the hospital bracelet still circling my wrist. Northwestern Memorial, he said gently, almost like a question. You okay, my friend? His voice held warmth, not pity. He reached for my bag before I could even lift it. I'm better now, I told him, sliding into the passenger seat. The car smelled faintly of strong coffee and pine air freshener. A rosary swung gently from the rearview mirror, catching the light as the car shifted in gear. On the dashboard, taped carefully where the driver could see it every day, was a photo of a young man, dark-haired, smiling, full of life. Evston, right up on Sheridan Road. Victor confirmed, checking his GPS before merging into traffic. "Heart trouble?" he asked suddenly without hesitation. I blinked, caught off guard. Most people avoided the subject, afraid of discomfort. I nodded. "Yes. My father had 3 heart attacks," Victor said, matter-of-factly, his hands steady on the wheel. "Tough man. Worked construction for 40 years. Each time we thought we'd lose him." "Did your family rally around him?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Victor let out a short laugh, tinged with bitterness. "Oh, we did. The first time. Everyone showed up, everyone prayed, everyone promised to do better. By the third," he shook his head, his jaw tightening. "By the third, my siblings were complaining about hospital visits, about schedules, about how it was too much trouble." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes serious now. "Family's complicated, isn't it?" The question lingered in the air between us as we merged onto Lakeshore Drive. To our right, Lake Michigan stretched out endlessly, its surface broken into jagged ripples by the April wind. To our left, the Chicago skyline began to recede, its towers shrinking as we left downtown behind. "My daughter couldn't even leave her husband's birthday party," I heard myself say, my voice quieter than I intended. "The doctor told her I might not survive the night, and still she stayed." Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening. "Ah, man," he muttered, his voice low. "That hurts. That really hurts." "How old is she?" 42. "Old enough to know better," he said firmly. "You'd think so." Victor was silent for a moment, then lifted one hand from the wheel to gesture at the photo taped to the dashboard. "That's my son, Eduardo. Lives in Los Angeles now. Big shot marketing executive. Beautiful house. Expensive car." "You must be proud," I offered. "I was." His voice cracked slightly on the word. "I haven't heard from him in 5 years. Last time we spoke, he told me to stop calling so much. Said it was embarrassing when his colleagues heard about his taxi driver father." His words hung heavy in the quiet car, the city lights flickering across his face. 2 men, 2 fathers. Different families, same ache. The words struck me like a physical blow, so sharp, so precise, I almost staggered under their weight. For the first time, I felt truly understood. Here was a man who knew the unique, unbearable ache of being cast aside by the very person you had poured your life, your sweat, your sacrifices into raising. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. How do you ever recover from it? How do you patch a heart torn open, not by strangers, but by the blood of your blood? Victor guided the car smoothly off the Belmont exit, steering north through the winding streets of Lincoln Park. His voice was steady, but his words carried the gravity of lived truth. "I learned something important, Benjamin. Family isn't just about blood. Family is about who shows up when you need them most. Who answers the phone at midnight no matter how tired they are. Who sits for hours in a hospital waiting room because they can't bear the thought of you being alone." I turned my head toward the window, watching as familiar landmarks blurred by. The irony was cruel that we were passing not far from where Agnes and Martin lived, in their high-rise condo crammed with expensive furniture and art I had in one way or another helped pay for. My hard-earned dollars had bought their comfort, yet when I had needed them most, they had chosen convenience over compassion. Victor's voice pulled me back. When Eduardo cut me out of his life, I spent 2 years angry, he confessed, his hands tightening around the wheel. Bitter, resentful. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong, replaying every memory like a film reel stuck on repeat. But then I realized something that saved me. I was still giving him power. Even after he'd abandoned me, I was letting him control my happiness. His words landed like a revelation. "So what did you do?" I asked, genuinely needing the answer. "I started living for myself," Victor said simply. A faint smile tugged at his lips, and for the first time it reached his tired eyes. "I took the trips I'd always dreamed of, but never allowed myself to take. Learned to play guitar, found real friends who wanted me around for who I am, not for what I could provide. And you know what I discovered?" He glanced at me in the mirror, a spark of quiet triumph in his gaze. I'm not bad company at all once I stopped wasting my energy on ungrateful children. We had reached Evanston now, gliding past the campus where I had once proudly delivered Agnes on her first day of college. I remembered her wide-eyed excitement, the way she clung to my arm as we carried her boxes of books and clothes into that dorm room. I'd believed then that sacrifice equaled love, that every overtime shift, every dollar shaved off my own future, was an investment in hers. Now watching the students with their backpacks and easy laughter, I couldn't help but wonder how many of their parents were making the same mistake I had. The thing is, Victor continued turning down my quiet street, they think we'll always be there. Always forgive. Always pick them up no matter how many times they fall. But sometimes, Benjamin, sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is step back and let their children face the consequences of their choices. And then I saw at my house. The modest two-story colonial paint slightly weathered the front yard that had once been my pride, but now bore the neglect of 2 hospital-bound weeks. It looked smaller, less commanding than I remembered. Or perhaps it was me who had changed. Victor pulled into my driveway and cut the engine. He turned toward me, his expression solemn but kind. "I don't know every detail of your situation, my friend," he said softly. "But if your daughter can turn her back on you while you were fighting for your life, maybe it's time she learns what life looks like without the shield of her father's support." He refused my attempt to pay him, instead pressing a small business card into my hand. "My number's saved in your phone now. You need anything, rides, groceries, someone to talk to you, call me." That's what family does. Real family. I stood in my driveway long after his white Honda disappeared around the corner. His words echoed in my mind louder than the city traffic, louder than the April Wynn family is, who shows up when you need them. Agnes hadn't. Victor had. Dr. Ellis had. Even Harold and Eleanor, fellow patients I'd only known for days, had shown me more humanity than my own daughter. It was time. Time to stop living for Agnes's approval. Time to start living for myself. Time to let her feel the consequences she had so long escaped. I unlocked my front door, the familiar click of the lock releasing a sigh of relief from my chest. Home. The stale air greeted me thick from 2 weeks of abandonment, but still it was my air, my sanctuary, my space where no one could treat me as an afterthought. I had barely set my hospital bag down in the entryway when the sharp trill of the doorbell split the silence. Not once, but again and again, followed by harsh, impatient knocking. The pounding shook the glass panels in their frames. Through the frosted glass, 2 blurred figures loomed like shadows at war. "Dad, open up, we know you're in there." Agnes's voice, sharp, commanding, carrying that furious edge I remembered from her teenage tantrums. But now it was deeper, more desperate, like she wasn't just demanding, but afraid. I opened the door, and there they were, Agnes storming past me without waiting for an invitation, her eyes flashing with a blend of entitlement and fear. Martin followed at her heels, his usual arrogant swagger intact, as if my home was merely another possession they had the right to claim. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to shrink back. This was my house, my life, my rules, and they were about to learn what that truly meant. "What stupid thing did you do with the power of attorney?" Agnes's voice cut through the air like broken glass. She spun on her heels to face me, her perfectly styled hair now frayed from the rush, her expensive business suit wrinkled in places she hadn't noticed. Her composure, always her armor, was cracking. "The bank called us an hour ago." Her tone was sharp, accusing, as if I were a child caught stealing from the cookie jar instead of the man who had built her life from the ground up. "Stupid," I repeated, closing the door behind me with deliberate slowness, buying myself a heartbeat to process their ambush. The latch clicked like a judge's gavel. "I was dying in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and you were at a birthday party." The words hung between us like a blade suspended in the air, waiting to fall. Martin stepped forward, puffing up his chest, trying to use his height to cast me in shadow. His voice dripped with condescension. "Old man, you don't understand what you're messing with. You need financial supervision. The heart attack clearly affected your judgment." My judgment? I walked past them, forcing them to follow me into my living room, into my territory. The familiar walls, the framed photographs, the armchair that had molded to my shape over the years. This was my ground, not theirs. My judgment told me to revoke access to my accounts from people who couldn't be bothered to visit their dying father. Agnes's face flushed crimson. Her lips trembled, but her pride forced the words out. We didn't know it was that serious. The doctor made it sound routine. Dr. Ellis told you I might not survive the night. My voice remained calm, steady, controlled the tone of an engineer reading facts from a blueprint. And you said you were busy. Her eyes widened, the practiced mask of excuses faltering. She stumbled over her words. That's not how. Did you? Martin's hand shot out, gripping her arm firmly, silencing her before she revealed more. His smile was cold, mechanical. Listen, Benjamin. You're confused. Heart attacks cause memory problems. Confusion about events. We were there for you. I lowered myself into my favorite chair, the same one I'd bought with my own money after years of overtime. The overtime I'd worked to pay for Agnes's lavish wedding. My hands rested on the worn armrests, my voice low but unwavering. You're lying to my face, in my own living room. Agnes's voice softened into that wheedling tone I knew too well, the one she had perfected as a child when she wanted to escape punishment. Dad, you're being manipulated by hospital staff. They probably filled your head with stories just to make you angry at us. Get out. The words were quiet, but they were final. Absolute. Martin's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. You can't just kick us out. We're family. We have rights. This is my house, I said, rising to my feet, surprised by the strength in my voice, by the steadiness of my legs. You have no rights here. None. You are trespassing. Agnes stepped quickly between us, panic cracking through her professional veneer. Dad, please, let's talk about this rationally. You're making a huge mistake, a mistake that affects all of us. I pointed to the door. The only mistake I made was trusting you with access to my life savings. Martin's fist clenched, his face twisting with anger. You ungrateful old fool. We've sacrificed for you. Agnes has spent years managing your affairs, and this is how you repay us? Sacrificed, the word tasted bitter on my tongue. I paid for your restaurant when it failed. I covered your credit card debts when you drowned in them. I gave you the down payment for your condo. Tell me, what exactly have you sacrificed? Agnes shot Martin a sharp look, warning him to stop, but it was too late. The truth was already in the air, thick and undeniable. I walked to the front door, my hands steady as I held it open. Get out. Get out of my house immediately. Agnes's mask collapsed entirely, her polished professional exterior falling away to reveal something colder, harder. This isn't over, Dad. We'll fight this. We'll prove you're not competent to make these decisions. Martin leaned close as he passed me, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You have no idea what you've started, old man. They stormed out, slamming the door behind them so hard the windows rattled in their frames. Outside, I heard their car doors slam, the growl of the engine, and then the sharp roar as they tore down the street. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy, not peaceful but charged, like the moment before a storm breaks across the sky. My hand shook slightly as I turned the deadbolt, the metallic click echoing through the emptiness of the house. I stood in the middle of my living room, staring at the throw pillow Agnes had knocked askew during her tirade. Slowly, I straightened it, smoothing the fabric with deliberate care. Such a small thing, such a meaningless detail. But in my orderly world, in my carefully guarded sanctuary, it felt like evidence of violation. And in that silence, I realized something: their storm was coming, but I was no longer afraid of it. We'll prove you're not competent to make these decisions. Agnes's parting threat looped in my mind like a broken recording, each repetition pressing deeper into my chest. My legs still trembled, not only from the lingering weakness of the hospital stay, but from the sheer weight of what had just transpired. I moved toward the kitchen, every step heavy, as if the confrontation itself had added years to my body. The kettle sat waiting on the counter, and I reached for it instinctively. The simple act of filling it with water was grounding, the hiss of the faucet oddly reassuring. Tea had always been my ritual of order, my way of taming chaos. When life felt unmanageable, I brewed Earl Grey. The familiar motions, the cool handle of the kettle, the measured scoop of tea leaves a slow pour, were like an anchor to a world that was slipping from under me. As the water heated, I replayed every detail of their intrusion. They hadn't called, hadn't tried to discuss like rational adults. No, Agnes and Martin had driven straight from the bank, stormed through my door like raiders, their words sharp as blades. They hadn't come seeking clarity. They'd come to intimidate, to reclaim what they thought belonged to them. Martin's aggression was the most telling. The way he had leaned into me, towering his voice thick with contempt. Old man. Those words dripped with disdain. He wasn't mourning, wasn't confused about the power of attorney. He was cornered, desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous. The kettle began to whistle, piercing the silence, and I poured the boiling water over the waiting tea leaves. I watched the dark amber swirl into the cup, tendrils of color, blooming outward like cracks spreading across a fragile surface. My hands had steadied now, the trembling replaced with a colder, sharper kind of focus. I carried my tea into the living room, settling into the chair by the window. The seat was perfectly placed, a habit of mine, angled to catch the best afternoon light, the kind of detail you only appreciate when you've lived a life of precision. Through the glass, the street carried on as though nothing had happened. Mrs. Rodriguez knelt in her garden, coaxing roses into bloom. The mailman ambled from house to house, his bag swaying rhythmically. A picture of normalcy, while inside my walls my world had cracked open. Agnes's BMW was gone, but I could still feel their presence lingering like smoke that clings to curtains long after the fire's out. The echo of their voices, the slam of the door, Martin's whispered threat, they lingered in the air. We have rights. We'll fight this. Those words had revealed more than they'd intended. This wasn't outrage, it was panic. They hadn't simply lost access, they'd lost their lifeline. My money had been propping up more than I realized. Their fury wasn't about family or about concern for me. It was about survival, theirs not mine. I sipped the tea slowly, its heat burning down into me, and felt the truth crystallize. Canceling the power of attorney was only the beginning. If they were willing to invade my home, to shout threats into my living room, what else were they capable of? Agnes's threat rang sharper now. We'll prove you're not competent. That wasn't a bluff. That was strategy, guardianship, legal proceedings. If they could twist a judge into believing I wasn't capable of managing my affairs, they could strip me of everything: my finances, my autonomy, even this home. I reached for the notebook on the side table. Its pages had once been filled with calculations, diagrams, solutions that had built bridges and machines. Now it would serve a different purpose, plans not for projects, but for survival. My pen scratched deliberately across the page. Agnes and Martin, financial desperation. True motive, require money. Willing to weaponize legal system. Need stronger protections. Each word steadied me further, turned my fear into clarity. They thought age had weakened me, but they had underestimated something critical. I still knew how to prepare, how to anticipate, how to build defenses. The late afternoon sun angled through the window, golden and warm, illuminating the quiet room I had once cherished for its serenity. I'd spent so many years here in peace, reading, thinking, living in the stillness of a life I believed was safe. That chapter had ended the moment Agnes's voice rang out in my doorway. My quiet life was gone. They had made sure of it with their greed, their entitlement, their threats. Now a new life would have to begin, one built not on trust in family, but on protecting myself from them. Victor's words echoed in my head during the quiet ride home, each syllable lodging itself deeper into my conscience. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for ungrateful children is let them face the consequences of their choices. At the time, I had nodded, politely grateful for his calm wisdom. But now, after what Agnes and Martin had tried, his words carried a sharper truth. Canceling the power of attorney had been only the first consequence, a warning shot. If they insisted on escalating this conflict, I would make sure they understood just how costly their greed could become, not just in money, but in reputation, in trust, in the one thing they still believed they had control over me. I sat in my study, the walls lined with the books and papers that had once guided me through decades of engineering challenges, and reached for the phone. My fingers hesitated only briefly above the keypad. Then I dialed. Time to call Thompson and Associates about updating my will. If my children wanted a war, then they would discover I was still more than capable of fighting one. 2 days later, as I stood by the mailbox thumbing through envelopes, I saw Mrs. Rodriguez crossing her lawn. Maria Rodriguez, my neighbor of 15 years, usually greeted me with easy warmth, her smile as natural as the roses she coaxed into bloom. But today something was different. Her steps faltered. She tugged nervously at her gloves. Benjamin, she began, her voice careful, almost apologetic. How are you feeling? After your incident, the word landed like a stone. Incident. My engineer's mind flagged it immediately as out of place. Maria wasn't one for euphemisms. She was direct honest. I studied her face. Behind her concern was hesitation, maybe even doubt. I'm recovering well, thank you, I said evenly. Why do you ask? She glanced toward her porch, then back at me, lowering her voice. Your daughter stopped by yesterday. She seemed very concerned about you living alone after the heart attack. I felt the blood surge in my temples, but I forced my tone to remain calm. Agnes was here. Maria nodded. She said you've become forgetful, confused at times, that maybe you need supervision. Her words were careful, but the damage was already clear. Agnes wasn't just plotting behind closed doors. She was planting seeds, poisoning the well of my community. My neighbors, people I had known and trusted for years, were now being invited to doubt me. What exactly did she tell you? I pressed. Maria shifted her gloves between her hands. That you've been making irrational financial decisions, canceling important arrangements without really understanding the consequences. She asked me to keep an eye on you. Call her if you seemed unstable. I stood very still, the morning sunlight suddenly harsh on my skin. The strategy was systematic, deliberate. Agnes wasn't merely threatening court action, she was building a narrative, a story of incompetence. And she was clever enough to use people who genuinely cared about me as her mouthpieces. Maria, I said softly. My gaze steady on hers, did I seem confused or unstable last week when we talked about your rose garden? When I suggested the solution for your aphid problem, her face brightened, a rush of relief replacing her doubt. No, of course not. You gave me excellent advice. It worked, actually. Then trust that judgment, I said firmly, over gossip. She nodded, reassured, but as she turned away, I knew the damage was done. The idea had been planted. Agnes had seen to that. 3 days later, I took the bus downtown to Chase Bank, determined to put additional security measures in place. I wasn't going to leave any window open for Agnes to crawl through. After we finished the paperwork, the branch manager, Janet Chen, motioned me aside. Her voice was low, her expression troubled. Mr. Dunn, she said carefully, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but your daughter was here yesterday. She asked about procedures for financial guardianship. The words turned my stomach to ice. Guardianship, I repeated. Janet nodded. She wanted to know what medical documentation would be necessary to have someone declared unable to manage their own finances. I told her I couldn't discuss the details with her, of course, but she hesitated, then leaned closer. She seemed very focused on post-heart attack cognitive impairment. Very specific questions. Did she file anything? My voice was tight. No, but she scheduled a consultation with our legal department for next week. I thanked her, though my pulse was hammering by then. My walk home blurred into a fog of thought. Agnes wasn't bluffing. She wasn't flailing blindly. She was researching, laying groundwork, preparing to drag me into court to strip me of my independence. By the following Tuesday, the full scope of their campaign revealed itself in sharp, undeniable lines. This wasn't a family disagreement. This was a coordinated siege, and I was the fortress they meant to take brick by brick. At Brewster's Coffee, the place that had been almost a second living room to me for the past 10 years, the air felt different that morning. Normally, stepping through the glass door and hearing the little bell chime brought a sense of comfort, of routine. But this time, as I crossed the worn floorboards, I could feel a subtle weight in the way the room hushed for just a second before resuming its hum. Tom Brewster himself, the man who had poured me countless cups of coffee since Agnes was still in college, looked up from behind the counter. His smile was polite, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Benjamin, he said, his voice unusually careful. Good to see you're managing okay. The pause before that last phrase was louder than the clatter of mugs and spoons in the background. Even here, in the one place where everyone knew me, the poison Agnes and Martin had spread was seeping in. I studied Tom for a moment before replying, forcing a lightness into my voice. Tom, did someone suggest I wasn't managing well? For a fraction of a second, his expression slipped. His face reddened, and he busied himself with wiping down the counter, though it was already spotless. Your daughter and her husband stopped by, he admitted reluctantly. They mentioned, well, they said you'd been having some difficulties since the hospital. Impulsive decisions. Confusion about money matters. So it was here too. My sanctuary, my community slowly turning into a courtroom without walls. I didn't argue. Instead, I ordered my usual black coffee, placed exact change on the counter, coins and bills lined neatly deliberately, and made casual conversation about the Cubs' season prospects. I spoke with clarity, precision, not a single wasted word. Slowly, I saw Tom's tension ease, his shoulders, dropping, his face softening, as if he'd realized how absurd the accusations were. You seem fine to me, he admitted as I picked up my cup. I held his gaze steady and unwavering. That's because I am fine, Tom. Remember that when people suggest otherwise. When I stepped back out into the cool Chicago air, the bitterness of the coffee on my tongue was nothing compared to the bitterness settling in my chest. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table spreading out the evidence like an engineer, dissecting a failed system. Notes, conversations, reactions. A pattern was forming with terrifying clarity. 3 neighbors, my bank. Local businesses where I was a regular. Agnes and Martin were planting seeds of doubt everywhere, cultivating a garden of suspicion they could harvest later in court. This wasn't random gossip, it was a systematic campaign. They weren't just questioning my choices, they were methodically rewriting my identity in the eyes of the people around me. I opened my notebook, the same one I had once filled with formulas, bridge calculations, and precise blueprints. Now, instead of steel and concrete, I was mapping a war of shadows and manipulation. Agnes and Martin I wrote in careful block letters. Organized competency challenge campaign. Timeline approx. 1 week. Targets neighbors, bank, local businesses. Goal established pattern of cognitive decline for legal guardianship. Below that I added 3 underlined words, counter strategy required. I stared at the page for a long time. My hand trembled slightly, but not from weakness. No, it was the weight of anger and resolve surging through me. They thought I wouldn't see through this. They thought I'd crumble quietly, letting them write the ending of my story for me. Not a chance. I picked up the phone and dialed. Thompson and Associates, this is reception. How can I help you? This is Benjamin Dunn, I said, my voice calm but hard as steel. I need to accelerate my will modification appointment. How soon can we meet? There was a pause, the sound of quick typing on a keyboard. We have an opening tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. I'll be there. As I set the phone down, I knew the truth with absolute clarity. They had declared war, not just on my independence, but on my reputation, my dignity, and my right to control the life I had built with 40 years of work and sacrifice. They believed an elderly heart attack survivor would be easy prey, that I'd fade into the role they cast for me, a confused, fragile man, incapable of defending himself. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next morning, the elevator carried me up to the 14th floor of the LaSalle Street building, its glass walls revealing the sprawling city below. Chicago stretched endlessly, a living map of families that either bound themselves together or tore each other apart. And in that moment, I finally knew which side mine belonged to. James Mitchell's office was a corner suite bathed in sunlight with floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto the deep blue of Lake Michigan. The receptionist, a sharp professional woman in her 30s, escorted me into a conference room where Mitchell already waited. Legal documents lay neatly arranged on a polished mahogany table, their significance heavy in the quiet air. Mr. Dunn, he said, rising to shake my hand. He was perhaps 50, his temples streaked with gray, his demeanor calm and deliberate, the kind of man who had weathered thousands of storms for his clients. Please have a seat. Before we proceed, I need to ask some standard questions to verify your mental competency. I appreciated his bluntness. At least here things were said plainly. Go ahead, I said, sitting straighter in my chair. He looked me in the eye. What's today's date? May 12th, 2025, I answered without hesitation. Then I added Tuesday. I didn't break eye contact. And in that moment, I wasn't just answering him. I was answering Agnes Martin and anyone else who dared to doubt me. Who is the current president? Mitchell asked, his tone neutral but watchful. Donald Trump, unfortunately, I replied dryly. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it faded quickly into the professional mask of a man who had heard it all before. And can you tell me why you're here today, Mr. Dunn? I straightened in my chair, feeling the weight of decades of hard work and betrayal pressing against my chest. I want to revoke my current will completely and draft a new one that disinherits my daughter and her husband entirely. Mitchell's eyebrows lifted slightly. That is a very significant decision. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Without a word, I reached into my leather satchel and withdrew my notebook. Its pages were filled with my careful handwriting diagrams and dates and engineer's chronicle of treachery. I've spent 3 weeks recording every detail of their actions since my heart attack, I said, sliding it across the table. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to paint me as incompetent. I wanted you to see the truth for yourself. Mitchell flipped through the pages slowly, his expression sharpening with each entry. This is very thorough documentation, he admitted. What in your own words pushed you to this point? I swallowed hard, the memory burning like acid in my chest. When I was lying in the hospital, unsure if I would survive, my daughter chose to stay at her husband's birthday party instead of coming to my side. That told me all I needed to know about where her priorities lay. And when I finally took back control of my finances, they responded by trying to destroy my reputation, poisoning my community, and plotting to strip me of my independence. Mitchell nodded grimly, jotting a note on his yellow legal pad. I understand. Illinois law allows complete disinheritance, but we need to ensure this document is airtight. They may try to challenge it, arguing that your heart attack has impaired your judgment. Your notes will help, but I'll also include specific language designed to block such claims before they can gain traction. For the next hour, I watched as he crafted the document with the precision of a surgeon. Every line carried weight. Every clause was a shield. By the time he was done, my future and theirs had been rewritten in ink. The new will left everything, my home, my savings, my investments, even the personal property I had collected over a lifetime, to the American Heart Association. Agnes and Martin would receive exactly $1 each. Not because I had forgotten them, but because I wanted the record to show that I remembered them all too well. This clause, Mitchell said, pointing to a carefully worded paragraph, declares that you are of sound mind and body, that this decision was made after careful consideration, and that any attempt to contest it based on mental incompetency will result in the immediate forfeiture of even the $1 bequest. I smiled for the first time that day. Perfect. At Mitchell's signal, 2 paralegals, strangers to me but professionals in their own right, entered the room. Their presence was not symbolic, it was protection. Independent witnesses to ensure that no one could later claim I had been coerced, pressured, or confused. Mr. Duntawan, Mitchell said formally, his tone sharp and deliberate. Do you understand the contents of this will? I looked him squarely in the eye. I understand completely. I am leaving my estate to charity and disinheriting my daughter and son-in-law. Are you making this decision of your own free will without outside influence or coercion? Absolutely, freely. In fact, it may be the most logical decision I have ever made. My hand did not tremble as I signed my name, each stroke steady and precise, the same hands that had drafted engineering blueprints for bridges, machines, and systems over 40 years of work. The paralegals signed beneath mine, and Mitchell pressed his notary seal with an audible snap that sounded to me like the closing of a steel door. This will is now legally binding, he said, sliding the original into his office safe with finality. Tomorrow I'll file a copy with the Cook County Probate Court. From this moment forward, your estate is secured against their interference. When I left his office and stepped into the elevator, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: lightness. The suffocating weight of fear, anger, and betrayal loosened its grip. For the first time since my heart attack, I could breathe deeply. Agnes and Martin had declared war on my independence, my reputation, and my dignity. They thought an aging man with a weakened heart would be easy prey. But now, with one signature, I had turned the battlefield against them. They were about to learn the true cost of their greed. The elevator descended steadily, each floor passing with a muted chime, carrying me away from the polished offices and legal language and back into the ordinary world. But for me, it was no longer the same world I had entered an hour earlier. I was not returning as a victim of betrayal or as an old man under siege. I was returning as a man who had finally seized back his dignity and his freedom. For the first time in months, the shadows of Agnes and Martin's greed did not feel like chains around my neck. 3 days later, I sat in my living room, the late afternoon light spilling across the same carpet where only 2 weeks ago Agnes and Martin had stood over me, like vultures, their words sharpened into threats. Back then I had felt cornered, but now I felt as solid and immovable as the foundation of the house I had built my life within. The will was safe in Mitchell's office, locked behind steel and law, but the true weight of it lay here in my chest, in the knowledge that their carefully constructed future, built on the assumption of my submission, had vanished with a stroke of my pen. At precisely 4:00 p.m., I picked up the phone. I had chosen the hour, deliberately imagining them both at home, settled into their routines, comfortable in their entitlement. I wanted them to have hours to stew in the aftermath of what I was about to say. The line clicked and Agnes answered. Her voice, warm and falsely sweet, reached me across the wire. "Dad, what a surprise. How are you feeling?" "Much better, actually," I said, keeping my voice even, almost casual. "I'm calling to inform you of something important." There was a pause, the kind of silence that hangs just before a storm. "Oh," she prompted, "I've changed my will." The silence stretched now long enough that I could hear her quicken breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped its false warmth. "Changed it? How completely?" "When I die," I said with deliberate calm, "you will receive nothing." What her voice cracked into disbelief, then rose sharply, almost shrill. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing, that's impossible. Everything goes to the American Heart Association. You and Martin will each receive exactly $1 to prove I didn't forget you." There was the sound of the phone clattering against a surface, then muffled whispers. I caught fragments, panic, urgency. Then Martin's voice, sharp and heavy with arrogance, filled the line. "Benjamin, you can't be serious about this nonsense." "Dead serious, Martin," I said evenly. "The new will was signed 3 days ago. Witness, notarized, and already filed with probate court." There was a long beat of silence before Agnes came back, her composure unraveling audibly. "Dad, this is insane. You can't just... We need to talk about this. Face to face. Feel free to come over," I replied. The line went dead. I set the receiver down, walked calmly into the kitchen, and brewed myself a cup of tea. I carried it to my favorite reading chair, the leather creaking beneath me as I settled in. The sun was low now, painting the room in warm gold, bathing the familiar furniture in peace. Somewhere across the city, Agnes and Martin were pacing, shouting, blaming, planning. Their world was collapsing and mine was finally steady. 47 minutes later, yes, I timed it, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, the same aggressive chime they had used 2 weeks earlier. But this time the balance had shifted. This time the house was mine again. When I opened the door, Agnes swept past me in a rush, Martin following close behind. Yet their body language betrayed everything. Gone were the smug smirks and predatory confidence. What I saw now were two people stripped of their illusions, smaller, desperate, clinging. "Dad, please." Agnes's voice cracked as she turned to me. The perfect veneer she always wore had shattered. Her hair was unkempt, her tailored suit creased as though she had been pacing and tugging at it. "Please tell me this is some kind of joke." "No joke," I said, my voice steady as bedrock. "Legal documents don't have punchlines." Martin, refusing to surrender his role as intimidator, stepped closer, puffing himself up. "Old man, you don't know what you're doing. This decision affects more than just you." I let the silence hang between us, then tilted my head. "Really? And who else does it affect?" He opened his mouth, ready to spit out some speech, but faltered, choking on the truth he didn't dare admit, that their entire financial future depended on me. His jaw worked, but no words came. Agnes sank onto my couch without invitation, her hands trembling, her voice a broken whisper. "Daddy, I made mistakes. I know I did. But cutting me out completely, that's not who you are." I looked at her, my daughter, the woman I had raised, the same woman who had left me to die alone, and felt no softness left in me. "You're right," I said quietly. "The father who would have accepted your neglect and abuse died in Northwestern Memorial. I am someone different now. We can work through this." Agnes's voice trembled, but she forced it into the same pleading tone she'd once used as a child, back when she'd broken a treasured vase or dented the family car. Back then, I had always forgiven her. Back then, I had believed her. "I'll be better, more attentive. I'll call every day. Agnes. I cut her off, my voice low, steady, but carrying the weight of years of disappointment. Where were you on April 14th when I was dying? She froze, the words stopping in her throat like glass shards she dared not swallow. She stammered. How do you know about Dr. Ellis told me everything? I interrupted, my eyes locked on hers. He told me how you couldn't bring yourself to leave Martin's birthday party, how you said you'd try to visit me if your schedule permitted. My life was slipping away, Agnes, and you treated it like an inconvenient appointment. Martin's face darkened immediately. He leaned forward, his jaw tight with anger. That doctor violated patient confidentiality, he snapped. He had no right to tell you that. I turned to him, my gaze sharp as a blade. He told a patient me how his family responded to his emergency. That isn't a violation, Martin. That's honesty. Brutal, unforgiving honesty. Agnes broke then. Her composure, her professional polish, all of it shattered. Tears welled in her eyes and then spilled down her cheeks in heavy streams, streaking her mascara like black scars of regret. Her shoulders shook as sobs poured out of her, unrestrained raw. I was wrong, she whispered, then louder, as if the volume might erase the truth. I was wrong, I made a terrible mistake. But you can't punish me for the rest of my life. I leaned back in my chair, calm, collected, the opposite of the chaos unraveling before me. I'm not punishing you for the rest of your life. I said, my tone steady like the measured voice of a judge passing sentence. I'm punishing you for the rest of mine. Martin's mask of authority cracked as he knelt beside Agnes, both of them physically beneath me, now their desperation tangible. He grabbed her trembling hand as if their combined weakness might somehow become strength. Please, Benjamin, Martin begged, his voice losing the edge of arrogance it usually carried. We're begging you. Don't do this. You don't understand what you're doing. I tilted my head, studying them, memorizing this moment. Now, I said softly, you finally know how it feels. How it feels to be abandoned in your darkest hour when you needed someone to care, and they chose not to. Agnes looked up at me then, through the river of her tears. Her mascara streaked down her face, smudged and broken, looking less like the war paint of a fighter and more like the ruins of someone defeated. Her voice cracked, fragile as porcelain. Please, Daddy, she whispered. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I held her gaze, my expression unreadable. Sorry you got caught, I asked quietly. Or sorry you did it. Her sobbing intensified, but Martin yanked her roughly to her feet. The desperate man who had knelt only moments before was gone, replaced by something darker, colder, more dangerous. His eyes burned with defiance, and his mouth curled into a sneer. Fine, he spat. You want to play this game, old man? We'll see about that. My brow arched. What game, Martin? The competency hearing, he said, his voice growing louder, feeding off his own venom. We'll prove you're mentally unfit. That heart attack scrambled your brain, made you paranoid, bitter, vindictive. No rational person destroys their family over a misunderstanding. Agnes wiped at her face, smearing the mascara even further, and straightened herself, trying to piece her fractured dignity back together. Her business persona slipped back into place, though the cracks were still visible. Dad, she said carefully, as though rehearsed, we've already spoken to people about your condition, your neighbors, your bank. They're concerned about your decision-making. I rose slowly from my chair, letting my full height cast a shadow over them both. My voice came out deep, measured, unshakable. You mean the lies you've been spreading, the manipulation campaign you've been running against me? Martin met my eyes, his arrogance returned in full force. It's not manipulation when it's true. And with that, the mask was gone. No more pretense. No more family pleasantries. Just the battlefield laid bare. Now you're old, sick, and making irrational decisions. Martin spat, his words sharp as broken glass. I didn't flinch. My voice came out slow, calm, steady, the kind of calm that made them both uneasy. The only irrational decision I ever made, I said, was trusting you with my financial information for 2 years. Agnes's face flushed, her eyes flashing with desperation. She darted forward, planting herself between me and the door, her arms outstretched as if she could block me the way she once had as a child, begging me not to leave for work. We're not leaving until you agree to reconsider, she insisted, her voice trembling with urgency. You're not staying regardless, I replied. My patience had been bled dry long ago. I moved around her, slow but deliberate, heading for the front door. This is still my house, not yours, not his, mine. But Martin was quicker. He stepped into my path, broad-shouldered and smug, trying to look like the man in control. His eyes gleamed with false confidence. You'll regret this decision, Benjamin. We'll fight this will with everything we have. I couldn't help the bitter laugh that slipped from my throat. With what money? I asked, tilting my head. Then I added with deliberate cruelty, oh, that's right. You don't have any. The weight of my words sank into them like stones dropped into water. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, they both seemed to understand their reality. Without access to my accounts, without the promise of inheritance, their threats had no teeth. They had nothing. Agnes's face turned ghostly pale, the foundation on her skin unable to mask the truth in her eyes. You can't just abandon us like this, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice, only fear. Watch me, I said coldly. Martin's fists clenched at his sides, the veins on his neck bulging. His voice broke into a roar. You think you're so smart, but you're just a bitter old man dying alone. I didn't even blink. Better alone, I said each word like a hammer, than surrounded by people who see me as nothing more than an ATM. Agnes's tears dried as quickly as they came. What remained was something harder, uglier. Her grief twisted into rage and her voice dropped low, venomous. This isn't over, she hissed. We'll find a way to contest this. We'll prove you're incompetent. You'll do exactly what you did when I was dying. I interrupted, throwing the words like knives. Nothing. I reached for the front door and pulled it open wide, the cool Chicago air rushing in like freedom itself. Because when it matters, you only think about yourselves. Martin leaned in close as he brushed past me, his breath hot against my ear. You have no idea what you've started, he whispered, his voice dark, almost feral. This war isn't over. Agnes lingered a moment longer in the doorway. Her face was a strange mixed pain carved into her features, calculation flickering in her eyes. I'm still your daughter, she said finally, her voice hoarse. No matter what legal documents say, and daughters have rights. I locked my gaze on hers. Daughters who show up have rights. Daughters who abandon their fathers face consequences. The silence between us was suffocating. Then with a sharp motion, Agnes spun on her heel. The door slammed behind her with such violence that the windows rattled in their frames. Through the glass, I could hear them arguing in the driveway, voices raised sharp, cutting into each other. They bickered about blame, about strategies, about lawyers they couldn't afford. Their shouting carried down the quiet street, a spectacle for the neighbors. I locked the door, slowly, deliberately. Then I walked back into my living room and sank into my chair. The old leather creaked beneath me, wrapping me in a comfort neither of them had ever given. Their car roared away, the sound fading into the distance. For the first time in days, the house was quiet again, peaceful, but I knew it wouldn't last. Their threats weren't empty. They would try again. They would scrape and claw and twist the law to get what they thought was theirs. But I wasn't afraid. I'd been solving complex problems for 40 years. I'd designed structures that could withstand storms, earthquakes, the slow erosion of time. This legal structure I had built was no different. It would hold. Outside evenings settled over Chicago, the streetlights flickering on one by one, bathing the neighborhood in amber light. Somewhere across the city, Agnes and Martin were plotting their next move. But here in my own home, surrounded by the life I had built with my own hands and mind, I was exactly where I belonged. The phone rang, its shrill tone echoing through the quiet house. I stared at it for a moment, then let it ring untouched. Some calls didn't deserve to be answered. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.